Hi, welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
And with everything going on the way it is...
You mean the great coronavirus quarantine of 2020?
Yeah, we're pretty much locked in. We figured everyone could use a cheer up, so we're going to discuss a movie quietly acknowledged as an action comedy classic of the 1980s, and, well, I think, one of the most entertaining chase movies ever made. So we're going to perform the litmus configuration on Midnight Run from 1988.
Robert De Niro is a bounty hunter.
Your mother ever teach you how to talk nice to people and not shoot at them?
Charles Grodin is an accountant who embezzled $15 million from the mob.
It is truly in your best interest to just relax.
I'm totally relaxed.
I want this guy taken out, and I want him taken out fast.
The mob wants him dead. The FBI want him alive.
I'm going to bring him into federal court. Do I make myself understood?
And his bail bondsman wants him in L.A. in 72 hours.
They can't fly. They also suffer from acrophobia and claustrophobia.
I'll tell you what, if you don't cooperate, you're going to suffer from fistophobia.
Travo has a funny way of bringing people together.
Who the hell were those guys?
Those are hired killers back there.
I can't take this.
Hired to kill who?
Hired to kill this guy. You had this guy, what, 4 days? Look, you got 5 hours left.
From the director of Beverly Hills Cop.
What is your plan?
You guys look like you do a lot of traveling.
Yeah.
Midnight Run.
Disgraced cop turned bounty hunter Jack Walsh has a chance to get out of his profession when he takes a contract for $100,000 to track down Jonathan the Duke Mardukas, a mob accountant who has skipped bail. Jack needs to bring him back to L.A. within a week, but what was supposed to be an easy job gets complicated as the pair find themselves pursued by the FBI, the mob, and a dim-witted rival bounty hunter, all while Jack struggles to cope with his neurotic and annoyingly talkative prisoner. As usual, we'll be discussing Midnight Run in detail, so if you haven't seen the film and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the movie before listening to the rest of this episode. Midnight Run was released by Universal Pictures on July 20th, 1988, was shot on a budget of $35 million and made $81,600,000 at the box office.
So most of that money went to all of the stunt cars, right?
I'm assuming so.
Like the hundreds and hundreds of stunt cars.
And helicopters and everything else.
Trains. Basically every mode of transportation ate this budget.
As for awards, it was nominated at the 1989 Golden Globes for Best Motion Picture Musical or Comedy. Unfortunately, it lost to Working Girl.
I don't think that's unfortunate. I mean, Working Girl has a lot of problems, but in terms of quality entertainment for me, I'm always going to go for Working Girl.
I got to give this one the edge between the two of them. I am disappointed this at least didn't get a screenplay nomination that year at the Oscars, though, because I do think the screenplay for this is fantastic. Okay, so this is your first time seeing this movie, right?
Second, because we saw it last night. And we saw it again tonight.
Watching it for the podcast.
Yes, watching it for the podcast was the first time. It's one of those films that I knew the title, I kind of knew who was in it, but I always got it mixed up with 48 Hours or Beverly Hills Cop. So they all came out around the same time, right?
They're a little spaced. Like 48 Hours is very close in terms of the plot and the style of the movie.
Maybe that's what it is. But in any case, this is the first time I had seen it, and I did not know what to expect. I didn't know if it was a comedy. It's one of those comedies where you might not laugh out loud very often, or at least I did not. But it was enjoyable.
For me, I remember way back, might be one of the first R-rated movies I was allowed to watch, actually. I remember...
Oh, you sweet summer child. I was watching R-rated films before I remember.
I remember my brother had rented this and A Fish Called Wanda. And I was not allowed to watch A Fish Called Wanda because there was sex involved. But this one, violence and strong language, apparently it was fine. So I was very happy to sit down and watch it. And I absolutely loved it at the time. I remember as a kid thinking, this must be what the real world is like. This is what, cops and bounty hunters and the mob and that whole environment is really like. I think this also might have been the first time I'd seen Robert De Niro in anything. I knew of him as an actor, but I don't think I'd actually sat and watched one of his movies until this one. So it kind of changed how I viewed De Niro. I kind of assumed he was much more of a mainstream actor doing these kind of movies when this is sort of an outlier for him.
I was trying to figure out what was the first De Niro movie I'd ever seen based on this, because I remembered Charles Grodin specifically from The Great Muppet Caper, and that might be the only thing I've ever seen him in besides this. I'm not sure. So every time Jonathan, aka the Duke, every time the Duke would mug at the camera, I'd be like, oh, you're gonna steal some diamonds. I know this look.
I will say this movie is one of those movies I never get tired of. If I'm ever in a bad mood, I can pop this on. You heard when we're watching, I still laugh out loud at certain things in this movie. They never really get old for me. Part of that is the tone that, it's a bit of a strange movie in that I think it does have a lot of really laugh out loud funny bits. It has some action. It has a few scenes I think are actually kind of suspenseful, and a villain I think is actually kind of chilling. So it's a really odd mix of tones. I'm kind of surprised it works as well as it did. It's one thing that the director Martin Brest kind of became known for. Before this, he had done a movie called Hot Tomorrows that interestingly featured the Mystic Knights of Oingo Boingo.
No, what was it called again?
Hot Tomorrows.
How did I not know this?
I don't know. I'd never heard of it until I started researching this.
I was a massive, massive Oingo Boingo fan, to the point where when I was a teenager, my mom managed to hunt down a VHS copy of Forbidden Zone. She had it shipped from California somehow, and I've actually never heard of that, so I'm shocked.
Something we may have to hunt down at some point, because now I'm curious.
I don't know.
He did a caper film, Going in Style, and then he was filming War Games and got fired midway through that one. His career kind of bounced back with Beverly Hills Cop, and that movie has the same type of tone. It's Eddie Murphy cracking jokes, it's funny, and then the bad guys will suddenly show up and shoot a guy in the back of the head, and it's really grim and kind of violent, and you're like, whoa! So it has that same mixed tone. This movie came right in the middle of his successful period. He did this. His next movie was Scent of a Woman, huge hit, and he was up for an Oscar for it. After that, he did Meet Joe Black, which kind of had a mixed reception. His next film after that was Geely, and he has not worked since. In fact, he's kind of disappeared. Journalists have actually gone hunting to see what happened to Martin Brest, and he's kind of disappeared off the map.
Geely was not kind to basically anybody who worked on it, and I haven't seen Geely, so I'm just working off of an assumption, but it cannot be as bad as everybody's saying it is.
It's really bad. I don't think it should have been a career killer.
Right.
I'd almost say it's worth seeing just for one scene with Christopher Walken that's so goddamn bizarre. It seems like they just said, hey, Walken, do something, and he did, and it kind of makes for an amazing scene. But, oh, yeah, it's a mess. It's a terrible mess.
I'm hoping, given that we've recently seen directors who had a very bad film experience come back recently. Richard Stanley, who came back spectacularly with The Color Out of Space. I'd like to see more directors be given the chance to work.
Yeah.
For God's sake, they're good at it. Let them do their job.
Considering there's a lot of directors who do turkey after turkey and still manage to get giant paychecks and directing shots, I think one bad movie should not kill a career. And
especially when you have Scent of a Woman in your filmography.
And this and Beverly Hills Cop, any one of those movies should be enough to keep a career going for quite a while.
Right.
Maybe part of it was, I know Geely was like a very personal project for him. Maybe he was just so stung, he just couldn't take it anymore and wanted a break. Brest was supposedly known for his perfectionism. He'd do take after take after take, to the point where a lot of his camera crew and his first assistant director just quit on him, and he had to replace them midway through.
I feel for him, because in my creative life, I'm the same way, but I only have myself to answer to, and I only have myself to wear out. I would never be able to work with other people because of exactly that problem. Like, no, you're not doing it the way I want it done. I'm doing it myself. And that kind of micromanagement at a creative level is great if you're working alone. You can micromanage the hell out of yourself, but that would be a difficult working situation with a large crew, I would think. Certain people get the pass. I mean, like Kubrick can do whatever he wants, and he's an artist, it's okay. But when you're doing a mainstream movie for a studio like this, it's a little different. The script was by George Gallo. This was his second produced movie after the Brian De Palma movie Wise Guys, which, if you haven't seen it, is a fun movie that kind of has a bit of the same tone. He'd also write and direct 29th Street, Trapped in Paradise with Nicolas Cage, and Double Take with Orlando Jones. And I guess a lot of this came from his background and his personality. Like, the way that Jack and the Duke argue with each other, he said, was based on watching his parents fight. And supposedly the fear of flying that the Duke has came from him. That whole rant that he has about, these things go down, they're too heavy. It was pretty much Gallo's own views on flying. Oh, well, that was my big moment of laughter. When I was 9, I went on a plane for the first time, and I freaked out because exactly that. It's too big. It's not going to fly.
No. I'm telling you. I can't do it. No, I can't. These things go down. All right. These things go down. They go. It's too big. It can't go up.
So the fact that another an even fictional person would have that very same reaction. It's too big. That was great.
I wonder if that's a common thing for people who are afraid to fly, if that's like part of the thing that sticks in their head.
Maybe.
I gotta hand it to the script. There are so many characters and so many moving parts in this movie, and the way it's structured so carefully to make sure this character gets from point A to point B to point C where they need to be is really, really brilliant.
It is ridiculous. It reminds me of a lot of the types of films and stories that I like, where it's a whole bunch of different characters who have similar but different agendas, and they run into each other and interfere with each other, and eventually they all get together, and that's the end, where they all get together and the major climax happens. And that's what we get here. We get the FBI, the mob, the bounty hunters, if we want to just group them all together, the Duke. So upon my second viewing, I decided it was a great idea to kind of write down the groups of characters and how they interact. So I have a nice little diagram that reminds me a lot of a football play. You know what I mean? Like the little circles and the arrows. And so I have that. And it's really interesting that they pretty much all interact with each other at one point and interfere with each other at one point.
And the script has some really beautiful touches. One thing that I appreciate for the end of the second act, where Jack has lost the Duke, it seems like there's no way he's going to be able to get him back. He's at his lowest point, and he spends that scene in a coffee shop, confronted by the very thing that he wanted.
That he wanted the most, right?
It's such a beautiful, subtle, understated thing that he's confronted with this dream that he had that to him at that point is lost.
Right. But also, and this is kind of connected, but I wanted to talk about it briefly anyway. I was so upset every time he went into a coffee shop or a diner and he could never finish his fucking cup of coffee. Something would always happen and he'd have to have like maybe 1 or 2 sips of his coffee and he'd have to walk away from it. And I'm offended by that. As a coffee drinker, it made me very unhappy, especially as somebody whose dream was to open a coffee shop, like a place where you can sit and talk to people, relax, have a great cup of coffee, and he was never able to experience that. So maybe this dream of opening a coffee shop is a place where he's able to do that without having to slap down his money and run, a place where he can talk to people and be around people, but he also does not want to be involved with people at all. So the idea that he would want to own a place where he would be around people, but not necessarily familiar, is interesting to me.
The guy behind the counter.
Right.
He's could be like Tracy Walter in that one scene. He offers, a light to the smoke, maybe a sympathetic ear. That's about it.
Right.
Yeah. While the script is really good, a lot of the best bits in this movie are pure improv. And I love that Brest allowed the actors to just kind of go with it and make little changes that made the scene so much better. The little bit with Jack doing the FBI badge thing where he, does the little pose and flicks it open, which...
Oh, that's so De Niro.
It's one of my favorite shots in the movie.
Yeah.
Or a tiny one that led to this whole great little thing when they're on the train and Mardukas is talking about how, the line was, as an accountant, I'd have to advise you against it because restaurants, tend to go under.
Right.
Grodin changed one word. He said, as your accountant, I'd have to advise you. And that led to that whole back and forth that just is so kind of ridiculous and pointless.
I have to tell you, a restaurant is a very tricky investment. More than half of them go under within the first 6 months. If I were your accountant, I'd have to strongly advise you against it.
You would, huh? Yeah. Well, you're not my accountant.
No, I mean, if I were your accountant...
I told you. I took you out here.
No, I'm just saying that it's a very, very tricky business. And if I were your accountant, I would really strongly have to advise you against it as an accountant.
You're not my accountant.
I realize I'm not your accountant. Say if I were your accountant.
It's pointless. It's ridiculous. It's pedantic. And it really reveals a lot about the two characters, that the Duke wants to give him advice, but that advice is a veil. He wants to know Jack. He wants to know him and manipulate him. And one of the ways to do this is to insinuate himself into Jack's dream. Oh, I can be your accountant. Here's my advice. I would advise you against this as your accountant. He's already sold himself to Jack as his personal accountant without being asked, and even after being specifically told no. It's kind of amazing.
And of course, Jack doesn't want any kind of personal connection like that, so nope.
Right.
Yep.
Because personal connections are not what he does anymore. He's very cut off. He hasn't seen his ex-wife or his daughter for 9 years. Like, he doesn't want connections.
Now, getting into the main cast, we have, of course, Robert De Niro as Jack Walsh. This came right after The Untouchables, and after that movie, De Niro was looking for something a little different. He wanted to change of pace. He wanted to do something lighter, more of a comedy. And supposedly the movie that he pursued was Big. He really wanted to have the lead role in Big, and Penny Marshall just couldn't see it and went for Tom Hanks.
Yeah, I can't see it
instead.
either. I would have been interested to have seen it, but I'm not sure it would have worked as well.
After seeing him do goofier stuff in other movies, I think it would have been a very different movie.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to have changed the character a lot. But it would have been interesting. Now, this isn't the first time he's done a comedic role, obviously. He was in, like, The Gang Who Couldn't Shoot Straight, Brazil, The King of Comedy, but this feels like really the first time he did a real mainstream comedy.
I mean, obviously, King of Comedy and Brazil are not at all mainstream comedies. And that works because he's working with and against his types in interesting ways. In this movie, he's definitely working with his type. He's working with, the kind of bully gangster, the kind of role that he always plays. But he's attacking it from a different angle so that it is lighter. He's playing the straight guy a lot of times.
Yeah, it's a weird thing for him to actually play a role that you think any kind of big A-list actor could have played. That's a change for him right there. But I love that despite that, he's not half-assing it. He's still kind of bringing his full De Niro focus onto it. Because I feel like any other actor, this character wouldn't have this sort of backstory that you feel with this character. Mm-hmm. I mean, so much of this, it's not even in the dialogue or in the script, but you feel kind of the background of all the stuff this character has been through. The tough roads this guy has been down. The way he interacts with other characters, and you just feel this history when he goes up to some random guy at the police station and goes, "Hey, Stanley, come over here for a second."
So let's call it character density.
Yeah, exactly. He, of course, did his usual research. He consulted with actual bounty hunters and narcotics detectives and did a lot of his own stunts. And here and there you can see, like, he's in the scene in the River Rapids that he actually did part of that and did some of his own driving. Yeah. In fact, when it came to the driving, some of the reaction shots of Charles Grodin freaking out are reacting to De Niro's actual driving. He said it's one of the scariest things he ever did was driving with De Niro.
Oh.
As for the character himself, I like that, yeah, he's rough and tumble. He breaks the rules. He's not really the nicest guy, and yet he has this weird set of values.
He has a moral code that's a little confusing to me. Let me just lay it out.
Okay.
He won't take bribes, like he won't go on the payroll, basically, of the mob. I get it. He gets run out of town. I get it. But then he breaks how many laws to get the Duke where he needs to go? I mean, like, he steals an FBI ID. The first time we meet him, he's breaking into somebody's apartment, and I kind of vaguely remember something about bounty hunters not being able to break the law.
I'm not sure what the...
I'm pretty sure that's not something they can do.
There's weird exemptions for them on some level, but I'm pretty sure breaking into a house, yeah, that would not count.
He's impersonating a federal officer. He steals a few cars. So, I mean, he's just breaking laws left and right, while at the same time trying to remain morally superior. And that's an interesting cognitive dissonance because a lot of writers don't allow their characters to have belief systems that are in direct conflict this way.
Watching it again, I almost looked at this as sort of a redemption arc for him, this whole movie. So he was this cop, he has this sense of justice and wants to do the job, and when he loses all that, he's stuck living in this sort of bizarre parody of the life that he used to have. That he's not a cop, he's still catching criminals, but it's not quite the same. As he says, there's, nobody else involved, so nobody else to take a bribe. He can just rely on himself. But clearly it's not what he wants to do because he wants to get out of this business.
Right.
And he wants to kind of go back to being a little bit more of an upstanding citizen. So now he's faced with his job where he has the opportunity to do that, and yet the job keeps pushing him to break the law, to kind of violate his code.
He still doesn't have to. I mean, he did not have to steal a car, for instance. But the desperation to get out of this line of work pushed him to do things that he didn't think he'd ever do, which I really want to talk about something before we move on.
Okay.
So The Duke's name is Jonathan, referred to as John for the whole movie. Our main character's name is Jack. Jack, John, they're pretty much the same damn name. You barely ever just name someone Jack. They're usually John and they get nicknamed Jack, right?
They actually say his name is John when Doffler is canceling his credit card. John Wesley Walsh is his full name.
Right. So we get John and John. We get two people who have interacted with the same mobster, both been horrified by the situation because they were under the impression they were working for companies or precincts that were on the up and up. And they both responded to this revelation and temptation in different ways. The Duke steals from the mobster, and Jack decides, fuck this, and then is run out, basically. And they're basically the same character in a lot of ways.
Why don't you just leave him alone? You don't look like the kind of guy who would be involved in that sort of situation.
Why don't you just leave that heroin dealer alone? I was a mob accountant. I thought I worked in a legitimate firm. When I found out I was managing accounts that were fronts for Serrano, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing.
Yeah, but John, you still took what didn't belong to you.
How can you be on the side of a mobster?
I'm not on the side of a mobster.
You're on his side if you're not on my side.
I'm not on anybody's side. I got nothing to do with it.
You got everything to do with this. You're taking me to jail, and in jail, you know I'll be killed.
Well, that's not my problem.
Oh, it's not your problem. No. Did you read about me in the papers?
Yeah, I did.
Were you on my side then?
Yeah, I was.
Then why aren't you now?
They're both living in response to this one event, basically the event being, the crime lord, if we were just going to call him an event. And in a way, it's a study of the choices one could make, because he could have gone on the payroll.
I think that actually ties into the redemption arc.
It does, absolutely.
This whole question of the Duke keeps throwing at him that you should be on my side. We're both against this guy. Why are you helping him out by taking me to prison where I'm going to be killed? And it even comes to the moment where the Duke forces him to promise to let him go or he's not going to pull him out of the river.
Right.
And Jack lies.
You promised to let me go! Fuck you! Promise to let me go! Fuck you! You're making it very difficult for me to do the right thing here! Alright, I promise, I'll let you go.
Thanks for saving my life.
Thanks for letting me go.
I'll let you go, all right? The second you're in LA County Jail.
Oh, I would say technically he didn't lie. It's a technicality. It's a lie of omission, I guess, like omitting that, oh yeah, I'll let you go when we're done where we're going, but...
he lies against the spirit of what it is. But, up to this point, Jack has been kind of all about his word. He wants a contract with Eddie. Like he tells him, you do what's right. He's big about doing what's right, and if he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. But here, he's going against that. As soon as he got out of the river, he could let the Duke go, but he says, no, I'm still taking you with me because he still needs the money. So I think a lot of the movie is him getting to the point where his sense of justice is restored to where he can let him go and not claim the money.
Well, yeah, he caught him there by midnight, and that's all he wanted to do.
Yeah, again, that's right. Him keeping his word.
Which he did. He said he would get him to L.A. by midnight, which he did. So he got him to L.A. by midnight. He fulfilled his duty, even though he wasn't getting the money. There is the reward aspect of it that is kind of interesting to me. So the Duke is set free, basically, to live out his life and probably stay on the run for the rest of it.
Yeah.
And he's gifted Jack with, what was it? $300,000
in that neighborhood. Yeah.
Right. For letting him go. But he sells it to him like, this isn't a bribe. You already let me go. This is a gift. Which, come on. Yeah, it's a gift, but it's still kind of a bribe.
No, see, to me, it's the Duke having, again, that sense of justice, that he doesn't want to see Jack walk away empty-handed now. He lost his shot to get out of the business, and he really wanted to do that. He sacrificed so much to get there. He wants to see Jack rewarded. To him, it's just that Jack get his shot. Mm-hmm. So I saw that as less a bribe than more like, no, he's balancing the scales again. Jack has lost so much to Serrano. He just saved him from Serrano. He's going to balance the scales.
So the overlying theme in this movie is justice. And
I think so, yeah.
Every person's interpretation of what justice is. The FBI obviously wants to make the arrest, and that's their justice. The Duke just wants to be free because it's justice that he stole from a crook. And of course, Serrano wants the justice of, what you stole from me, I'm going to kill you.
And he loads Jack, who he calls, he's very self-righteous. I hate that about him. He doesn't like the fact that this guy said no to him and has this inner code that
Right.
he can't really wrap his head around. One other facet of Jack I think is interesting is that he has this inability to deal with the past and let go of the past, especially when it comes to Serrano and what it did to his life. I love that twice we get scenes where characters are like, oh, Serrano, isn't he the guy who ran you out of Chicago? And he won't acknowledge. He's like, he didn't run me out of Chicago. Or, oh, is that what you heard? No, that's what you heard? Nah. He won't actually say that Serrano ran him out. He can't deal with that injustice and actually have it said out loud.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to his failed marriage, he can't let it go. He still has the watch. He can't accept that it's not going to happen again, that he's not going to get her back.
Okay, so he says that he hasn't seen his ex-wife in 9 years because she married another police officer. And it's like, well, that's not why you guys separated. That's not why you got divorced. And we never learn why that happens. We get some kind of like, oh, she wanted XYZ, like blaming it on her. It wasn't his fault that the marriage fell apart. It wasn't his fault that he had not seen his daughter for 9 years. And she would have been like 3 or 4 when he disappeared. Mm-hmm. So he's not good at relationships, which is something we see over and over in the film. But he's also not good at taking responsibility.
Well, to be fair to him, I felt it was also kind of hanging over him that if he ever went back to Chicago and showed his face, they were going to nail him for the drugs that they claimed to have found in his house.
Right.
That they always had this thing over him to keep him away. But there's also this fascinating detail that she married a cop that supposedly is on the take and kind of corrupt. So you have to wonder, is it a case of she didn't take his side, she didn't believe what happened to him, and accepted this other cop's story that, oh, he's corrupt, and that's part of the betrayal? Is it that she blamed him for that he had to leave and, she was like, no, you should have just taken the money and gone along with it like everybody else? Either way, you can kind of understand why that would destroy his marriage and probably keep him away.
Right.
If he was always looked at as either this criminal or this guy who ruined everything because he was trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So I can understand some resentment on his part if that's the case. But I like that so much of this trip that they go on is him dealing with the past. He's able to let go of the watch. He's able to let go of this family that he's not going to get back. He has the satisfaction of seeing Serrano put in cuffs and telling him he's under arrest.
All of this spurred on by the Duke.
Mm-hmm.
The Duke who basically psychoanalyzes him for the entire trip. Oh.
Forget the $300,000. You should bill him as a therapy bill.
I know.
One scene I really have to give amazing credit to De Niro on that I think is one of his best moments of acting. The scene where he comes up with the plan to trap Serrano. I love that when you're watching the scene, you can actually see the light bulb go over his head in mid-speech.
Well, I didn't come this far not to collect my money. You understand me, you motherfuckers? I want the Duke back.
So what the fuck you telling me for?
What am I telling you for? I'll tell you what I'm telling you for. I got some of the Duke's belongings, that's why, including some computer disks that have every last detail of Serrano's businesses and his money laundering operations, everything. And if I don't get the Duke back in the next 2 hours, I'm going to turn those disks over to the feds. You hear me?
You can actually see this plot forming in his head, and he just spills out all this stuff, makes up the rendezvous, hangs up the phone, and De Niro does this wonderful nervous fidget where he turns, kind of half turns, grabs the matches, turns back, says he wants to make a deal. And you can see his adrenaline is going, that this idea of, oh my God, I'm finally going to trap this guy.
His mind is racing. And you could see how he was as a cop, because in that moment, he really is a cop again. He's creating a situation where he's acting as an undercover agent.
The other scene I have to give huge credit to him for is the scene where he visits with his family. And there is that amazing, incredibly uncomfortable moment with the daughter.
Yes.
Where, after 9 years, he hugs her and he literally has no idea what to say. And any other script, they would have had this wonderful redemptive moment, and he doesn't. He looks at her and you can see his mind racing, trying to figure out.
He doesn't deserve a redemptive moment, but the closest he gets, and I do really appreciate this, the daughter whose name I don't recall, but she comes out of the house and her last actions in the film is to offer him money, her babysitting money, and he refuses it. And that is so much, that tells me so much more about his character than just about anything else. The fact that, he's desperate for this money to get where he needs to go, but he absolutely refuses to take advantage of his daughter, who he did abandon, but cares enough about that he won't do that. And I really appreciated that character moment.
Jack adjusting the Duke's coat when they're getting in the station wagon. There's something about that gesture I find oddly sweet, like it's something he might have done for his wife or his daughter if she was wearing a long dress or something, almost out of habit.
But that is also something we talked about during the film that I'm not entirely sure if that's De Niro making sure that Grodin's costume stayed, clean and intact, or if it was a character move. Because it's on film, I'm just going to call it a character move because I have no other choice. But I'm not convinced that was part of the character as planned.
I kind of think in this moment, considering what Jack has just been through in the past few minutes, that he's a little humbled, that it is something. He's a little gentler in this second.
So do you think that may have been a small thank you for bringing him to a point where he had to go see his ex-wife and daughter?
I think so. Or maybe just him trying to dial back the bile just for a few minutes after what he's just been through. One other thing that occurred to me, if this movie were made in the 1940s, this would absolutely been a Humphrey Bogart role.
Oh, of course it would have.
It so fits in with that whole idea of the hard-bitten cynic who, no, he still has feelings and a sense of morality underneath.
Right.
So suddenly I want to see a 1940s version of this with like maybe Jack Benny as Jonathan Mardukas, and Edward G. Robinson could play Moscone, he could play Serrano. There's a couple of roles he could play.
I would really like him to be Marvin. If we're going to fantasy cast, because that would be amazing.
Honestly, I just picture like somebody like William Bendix or something in that role.
No. His stereotypical bravado of a gangster
That's
is
true.
Kind of Marvin.
He could do Marvin, yeah.
I think so. I would fight for it.
That's the thing about Robinson. He could do tons of these parts.
Yeah.
And like Barton McLean as Alonzo Mosley. I could totally picture him playing that one. Okay, let's move on to the Duke. In terms of the casting of him, De Niro and Brest were very certain early on they wanted Grodin. He had an audition, and he and De Niro just clicked it. It was perfect, and the studio didn't want him. This was originally at Paramount at the time, and they were trying to push for Robin Williams, who really wanted to be in the movie. And I think it probably would have been a very fun movie. I think Williams would have done a great job. Mm-hmm. I don't think the chemistry would have been quite the same. It's
not the chemistry that would have worried me with that casting, but that I think Williams would have played it a little too broadly. And I do enjoy the restraint that Grodin brought to the performance, because even when he was angry or even when he was exasperated, it was mostly done through facial expression rather than vocally. And there's no flailing. It was all very restrained.
Yeah. I mean, Williams can do restraint.
He can, but at the time, 88 would have been before Awakenings.
Yeah, just a couple of years. Again with De Niro, so we finally did get to see the two of them together. He had done World According to Garp isn't quite the same level of
which I
comedy.
Actually have not seen, so unfortunately I can't speak to that.
But it's definitely the better for not having it. It could have been worse, though. They were then suggesting that they rewrite the part to be a woman, cast Cher, and have it be a romantic relationship, which, no.
That makes no sense. Within the character arc and the story, that makes absolutely no sense to me, and I'm so glad they didn't do it.
Oh, me too.
That's a totally different movie, one that I wouldn't necessarily be against seeing, but it wouldn't have been this movie.
No. Now, the Duke, I've always thought he's a kind of a tricky character to get a handle on, because I feel like most of what we're seeing in the movie is not the real guy.
I agree.
I find it fascinating that the first few scenes we get of him, just on the phone and when he's packing to flee again, and he plays it very straight, very restrained, and I think that's probably closer to the real guy. Mm. And that as soon as he's in the car with De Niro, he's starting his game. That, like you said, he's trying to wheedle his way into this guy and manipulate him and figure him out. Yeah. So he puts on this persona of being this really neurotic, annoying character to just drive this guy nutty to the point where he can drive him to admit things about himself just out of sheer frustration, just to try and shut him up.
But it's less about just getting under his skin. The end game is that the Duke is very aware there's an expiration time on his bounty. He has to be there by midnight by a certain day, and he knows if he stalls long enough, he's all of a sudden worthless to Jack. Like, oh, well, I can't get my 100,000 because we're past the deadline, so I can let you go. Because a plane would have gotten him there in a few hours, but if he fakes a panic attack big enough to not be on a plane, he's slowing it down. So it's all about buying time.
Buying time, but also giving himself better opportunities to escape.
There's
much more of a chance on a train where there's regular stops that he could slip away somehow.
But also taking the control of the travel plans and the travel away from Jack. So in a better position to do what he needs to do. Plus, putting Jack at an emotional disadvantage by digging into his history and by forcing him basically to see his ex-wife and daughter. This is all putting Jack off his game so that he can buy more time, so he can slip away. So he's just a master manipulator.
And I think he's also trying to manipulate him to that point he gets to at the end of the movie where Jack sees him as kind of on the same side, that they are both against Serrano, that he's playing on those sympathies and trying to get him to the point where he might just let him go because he realizes, oh yeah, they're both guys who got screwed over by this mobster.
Would you agree that the end result, that Jack letting the Duke go at the very end, was a result of a successful emotional campaign against him?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, it helped that Eddie kept screwing him over to the point where he wouldn't want to help him anyway.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think the Duke succeeded admirably. And I gotta admire his discipline. There's a lot of scenes where, as you mentioned, they're barely eating anything. They've got like, a few cents to buy coffee and tea and that's it. And we realize later the Duke has tons of money. And yet he's holding back on revealing that, even though he's probably starving and really hungry.
Well, yeah, he's putting them both under the kind of emotional pressure and stress that would prevent clear thinking.
And man, his performance when he's playing the FBI agent in the bar is just incredible. I really think he's having fun with it. He's kind of spoofing this idea of what the FBI is, which we kind of see throughout the movie with Mosley as well.
Would you describe exactly what the last man who passed a $20 bill to you looked like?
30, tall.
About 6 feet tall?
6'5".
Dark brown hair.
Light colored.
Sounds like our man.
That's him.
I'd like you to notify all the other establishments in the area of this situation. What's the name of your establishment?
Red's Corner Bar.
Are you Red?
Yes, sir.
You dye your hair?
No.
Why do they call you Red?
Oh, it's short for Red Wood. My last name's Wood.
What's your first name?
Bill.
Thank you for your cooperation, Bill.
Despite having been basically kidnapped by a bounty hunter and tossed around and chased by the FBI and the mob, he's having a blast. I think he's aware that there is a huge possibility that these could be his last days on Earth, so why not have fun with it? At the same time, why not try to get away?
And yeah, he has his own personal jokes, like when Jack asks if he has any money, I was like, sure, lots. And of course, we find out later, yeah, he was telling the truth.
Right, and that was at the bus depot, and he exchanged all of these eye-rolling, kind of snarky looks with the teller at the expense of Jack. So he's definitely very aware that this is a ludicrous situation.
And I love how, as this woman is kind of hamstringing Jack and not buying into his FBI thing, he's just giving her this nod like, you go, good for you.
Exactly. And he winks at her like, yeah, you go. I thank you for also helping to stall all of this.
Or just,
you have no idea, but we are now in cahoots to stop him from getting me to LA.
Yeah, I think this is Grodin's best role. He's had a couple really good ones.
I disagree fully because I think his best role, in fact, his best moment was making love eyes at a pig puppet.
All right, that's a close second.
I mean, holy shit. As a kid, I was fully in belief that Charles Grodin loved Miss Piggy. Best role.
Oh my God, now I want an all-Muppet remake of Midnight Run.
Oh yeah. I'd watch it.
I want to see Kermit as Jack with the dialogue, just like throwing the F word everywhere.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, come on. That would be amazing. Let's move on to Alonzo Mosley, FBI. You actually have to put the FBI at the end. You're legally obliged to. Played by the amazing Yaphet Kotto. I think Mosley is in many ways the person Jack was. He's this law enforcement officer. He's eager to serve justice. He wants to nail Serrano. He doesn't have the sense of humor, but I feel like he actually does have that same sense of fairness and honesty. When they finally come to their agreement at the end of the movie, he abides by it, even though he doesn't have to. He could snap the Duke right back up if he wanted to strengthen his case. But no, he actually lets Jack take him off and take him to L.A.
Mosley has every reason to just arrest the shit out of Jack. Just to start with, he stole his FBI ID, which means he has not just stolen his identity, but he's humiliated him in front of everybody at the Bureau. And given that he's heading up this team, he's not in a lower position in the FBI. He's doing some important work, and that standing matters. The fact that his character had gotten from that place of humiliation and anger, chased this guy all over the fucking country, to then all of a sudden in one plane ride figure out, Jack is laying out the way they can trap Serrano and what they can charge him with.
If he just sets foot inside the airport, he's committed an overt act, conspiracy to obstruct justice. When he shows up with the Duke, you add kidnapping. Anybody packing a gun, conspiracy to commit murder. The fact that it's an airport, and Alonzo, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, I don't want to step on your toes. You can slap an interstate transportation aid or racketeering rap on him right away as well.
Yeah, well, none of that bullshit means anything unless you can get him to take those discs from you.
Don't worry, I'll get him to take the discs.
Get a wire on this man.
And you can see the respect that Mosley has all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, he's a good cop. He knows what he's doing. And it seems like from that moment on, all is forgiven. I don't buy that, but I allow for it because it furthers the story.
And I love how once they've reached that point, Jack is even a little bit more deferential to Mosley. He's like,
because he feels like a cop.
Yeah,
he's being
like,
respected.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to step on your toes.
Right,
yeah.
because he is being treated as a cop, which, I mean, despite having a bad experience as a cop in Chicago, you can tell that's really where he wants to be. Even if that coffee shop is the dream, he still wants to be a cop. I'm not 100% sure if after this film takes place, his character would go forward to buy that coffee shop. Or maybe he would and just decide, I'm not arresting enough people as the owner of a coffee shop. I need to go back and do something else. Gonna go to Quantico.
Yaphet Kotto, though, I love how much of his performance is just that slow burn glare at his FBI underlings, at the people he encounters, that moment on the train.
Where's Jack Walsh?
He got off with the other guy 2 or 3 stops ago. His real name's Mosley.
I'm Mosley!
That always makes me laugh.
I mean, it's very funny, but you can understand the frustration because it's like he's being met with that one humiliation over and over. And it's just driving him forward to try and catch them.
And he's so serious that I love that he has his own little arc, and that when they do get Serrano, when Kotto finally breaks out in that wonderful, ridiculous grin.
Oh, I love that.
It's so great that he finally has this moment of pure joy.
But something that I do want to address is that he is also very ambiguous. His morality is flexible. 1, he is able to let the Duke go. 2, he also lets Jack go, even though Jack broke dozens of laws. On top of that, 3, he steals cigarettes all the time. But he steals them from people he considers criminals. So it's okay. I'm stealing it from a criminal.
It's just from Marvin. So.
I mean, it's right, but it's a criminal. And it's low stakes thievery, but it still shows that he has a very flexible sense of morality. Like, it's totally okay for me to take from this asshole because he's an asshole.
To be fair, Marvin said help yourself. He didn't specify how many he could take, so...
That's definitely the same ballpark as I'll let you go.
Fair enough. Yeah, to me it comes down to the fact that he made a deal with Jack, and that they're similar in that level, that he made the deal, he'll stick to the deal. And that he likes this idea that, while he could have gotten the Duke, trying to get the Duke to roll over on Serrano and testify probably would have been a major hassle.
But it didn't matter at that point. They didn't need the Duke to testify. They had caught him in the act of doing other
That's
stuff.
What I mean.
Right,
That's why I think he's a little more gracious toward Jack, because Jack did give him this ability to skip over that step and just get Serrano.
Right.
And we can assume after getting Serrano, probably get all the other mobsters as well.
And I'm trying very hard not to get too pedantic, but just allow me a moment.
Oh, no, get pedantic. Please do.
These are not deals that he could have made without a lawyer involved.
Probably not. I assume that as an FBI agent in that station, he probably has a little bit of leeway to be able to do this.
And as a cop in Chicago, I doubt Jack would have had the necessary information to know what he could be charged with. I mean, these are sophisticated charges. According to Law and Order, you would need a district attorney present to tell you whether or not they could be charged. Don't listen to me. I base everything I know off of film.
It also might have been enough to, even if they couldn't make the charges stick, to make Serrano think they could, to get him to the point where he would spill on his other mob cronies. So
right.
It's a little iffy, but I can imagine them pulling it off.
So as enjoyable as I found this film, obviously I'm able to poke holes all over the place, even where there might not be holes. I've drilled a hole right here.
I'm willing to let it be a little.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lighthearted film, and you can tell when I'm having difficulty finding things to talk about when I'm digging down so hard on outside of the film things, like
bringing your vast legal experience from Law & Order into play.
Exactly.
Getting back to Yaphet Kotto, Kotto's performance in this is all the more impressive when you realize he was miserable during this movie. He didn't think it was going to work. He didn't think it was going to be very funny. He did not like the way that Brest directed because the numerous takes he felt just robbed it of energy. He loved working with De Niro because De Niro would keep improvising and give it a little bit more juice, but he just thought doing take after take just made it feel like he was just clocking into like a day job. And he was super sick. Supposedly he had a fever throughout almost the entire film. So watching the movie with that in mind, it's amazing that his performance is as great as it is and works so well.
And he did. I think he had one of the best performances in the film. So I'm shocked to hear he was ill and not happy.
When he saw it, he thought, oh my God, somehow this movie worked. He thought it was really funny, but he just didn't enjoy the experience, unfortunately. Although, Kotto would actually sort of play this character again. He plays an FBI agent in the Larry the Cable Guy movie, Witless Protection, who was named Alonzo Mosley. Although, when it came out on video, I guess they had to rename the character because they didn't have the rights to that name.
Of course.
Let's move on to Jack's rival, Marvin Doffler, played by John Ashton.
I love Dorfler. Every time he comes onto the screen, I'm like, yeah, what's he going to fuck up now? 'Cause he screws up everything. He's gross. He's mean. My God, even though he's really stupid, he's mean. But having said he's stupid and mean, he's not as bad at this job as you'd think. He gets to a point where he just starts following the cops because the cops are leaving the trail to where Jack and the Duke are headed next. It's kind of interesting that way. And yes, there's a lot of dumb luck attached to it. He's able to just kind of come upon them walking in the desert, that sort of thing. But I enjoyed his character, and I really enjoyed the play between Jack and Marvin, because I think in another movie, they would have been buddy bounty hunters.
And Jack keeps almost playing on this, hey, we're friends, Marvin. And Marvin's having nothing of it.
Which is a damn shame, because I would have loved to see them actually team up at one point, because, I hadn't seen the film. When they were all in the car together, I'm like, yeah, they're finally teaming up to get this go. No, they're not.
How the fuck did you know where we were?
I can't take
Shut
this
up a minute.
anymore.
Did Eddie put you on this?
Of course Eddie put me on this.
Son of a bitch. You know I have a contract with him?
You got a contract?
Yeah, I signed it on Monday.
You called me in Pittsburgh. You said you were fucking this thing up.
I'm not fucking anything up.
You should have been in L.A. 2 days ago.
Hey, Marvin, don't tell me how to do my goddamn job.
Yeah, the closest they come is when they kind of share that moment of laughing at Jack shooting down the helicopter. It's this one victory they kind of share, and it's eliminated a moment later when Jack slugs him.
Right.
I love that Dorfler is a complete idiot and thinks he's really smart. And as it's pointed out over the course of the movie that he doesn't know what's going on, he starts trying to up his game in being smart, and it backfires every time.
I love that the screenwriter decided to call him Marvin Dorfler. That is some J. Alfred Prufrock naming scheme. I love it. The idea that, Marvin, who already, that sounds just Marvin. And then, of course, Dorfler just sounds silly, like Dorfler.
I think of the Tim Conway Dorf sports videos, where he's always a goofball in those.
Right.
Yeah.
The combination of all of those vowels and consonants give you this mental image of ineptitude.
Watching it this time, the character that kept coming to mind is Jane from Firefly. He has that same sort of, I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm awesome, I'm cool, and no, he's actually an idiot. I got a lot of that off of him. He's played by John Ashton, who previously worked with Martin Brest in Beverly Hills Cop, where he plays Taggart, the guy who's most annoyed by Eddie Murphy's antics. He's great in those, too. He plays a lot of cops and soldiers and authority figures, and he's really good at playing that sort of blue-collar character the way that De Niro plays with Jack. It's funny. His presence, though, lends this movie an interesting distinction. We have two characters who have been killed by being squashed by King Kong in separate movies. Because Charles Grodin was in the 1976 King Kong, where he gets stomped on by King Kong. And John Ashton was in the sequel to that, King Kong Lives, where he gets smashed by Kong.
Were they both stepped on?
Grodin was stepped on. I think Ashton was pounded down into the ground with his fist.
So Grodin was Bambi.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just, that struck me as really bizarre. Yes,
Yeah.
I know. I make stupid movie connections. It's what I do.
No. I'm okay with this. I'm just amazed that that's the connection you were able to make. I shouldn't have, knowing what a huge Godzilla fan you are, but there are moments where one or the other of us will make connections, and I'm sure you've had the same response to some of mine at some point, like, whoa.
I've had a couple, yeah.
What the fuck? Where did that come from? Okay.
Another interesting difference from the script and the movie, in the original script, when Marvin tries to pull his trick on the mob guys and now I want $2 million, Tony actually kills him in that scene.
Interesting.
And I think it's a great change that they altered that, because otherwise in the original script, in the climax, the whole bust goes down totally smoothly. Serrano just takes the discs, he's under arrest, and that's it. By having Marvin as this X Factor who kind of walks in and almost ruins everything, it brings so much more suspense to that.
It does. It highlights what an idiot he is. Because, of course, the audience is in on this and the FBI agents are in this. But he's the only character who doesn't know that something really big is happening right now. And he just blunders in and just almost messes everything completely up. And I do really enjoy that. When you said that he was supposed to have been killed in the original script, I was thinking, I don't think anybody dies.
We get
Does somebody
4
die
or
in this
5
film?
people killed. The snipers at the bus stop.
Oh.
A couple of them get hit, and the guys in the helicopter.
Okay.
So those are our deaths right there.
Okay. So, henchmen.
Yeah, henchmen
Henchmen
basically.
die, and none
Yeah.
of our main characters die.
Nope. And I think it would have put the movie into a little bit more of a mean-spirited thing to actually have one of the characters die.
I agree. And that's why I took a moment to try and remember if there had been any deaths. Which, honestly, since we're talking about, I took a moment to remember if there were any. Let's talk about the lack of black people in this film. And, of course, the lack of women. I'll go for that, too. But specifically, the lack of black people in this film. We have Kodo, of course, who has a major role. So that's fantastic. And it's a role of authority. And that's great.
And I do think it's interesting to note he's actually specified as black in the script.
Really?
That was something that Gallo put in there very deliberately. And yet it doesn't really come into play in the dialogue or anything else in the film. I kind of think it's interesting that he specified this character should be black without making it kind of a big deal in the movie.
Mm-hmm. And then we have the first bail jumper in the
Boucher,
very
yep.
beginning. Right. And then the man on the train informing Mosley that Jack's real name is Mosley. And that's it that I can recall. That's it for our black characters in a film that's just so white. So white. It was the 80s, late 80s, whatever kind of gloss you want to put on it. But the truth is, like, that makes no sense to me.
It's unfortunate. I hate to say it for the period. It's kind of amazing that Kodo is playing Mosley, frankly.
I know. I agree. And I'm glad that he wasn't a bad guy on top of it. Because when our first quote-unquote bad guy, our first bail jumper was black, I was like, is this how this movie's going to go? Because I don't know if I can sit through this. Thankfully, it didn't. But there was a pronounced absence for me.
I actually felt the absence of women a little bit more. That you only have Gail, and that's really it. And you have Mardukas' wife. I think she has like one line, and she's in the background, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. The daughter, the wife.
The bus ticket clerk,
right.
who has some of the best moments there for any of the female characters,
but
honestly.
That's really about it.
That's really it, yeah. Let's move on to Jimmy Serrano, played by the amazing Dennis Farina. Here's the thing, in these kind of action comedies, so many times the villain is kind of buffoonish, and you can't really take him seriously. Yeah, I love that he has a lot of funny moments, but it's never at his expense. It's him getting angry and yelling at people. But you always sense, as soon as he's on screen, there's a real palpable threat. And something about Farina just really builds into that. It's funny that Dennis Farina himself actually was, like Jack, a former cop from Chicago who acted as a technical consultant for Michael Mann on, I think it was Thief, and had a role in that, and that launched him into an acting career.
Interesting.
And from there he was on Michael Mann's show Crime Story, which actually was filming at the same time as this, so they had to have a whole subplot with him in Vegas so they could kind of coordinate the two together. Mm-hmm. He was Jack Crawford in Manhunter, the original Hannibal Lecter movie. He was on Law & Order. He kind of replaced Jerry Orbach. I mean, some great stuff there. I miss him. He was such a wonderful presence. He could play really intimidating bad guys and cops equally well. And he's kind of the antithesis of Jack here in that if Jack is sort of the honest guy resisting corruption, he is the corrupting force. He ruined Jack's whole police department. He pulled Mardukas into his circle. And even when it comes to the disc trade, immediately he's going to double-cross Jack. It's just what he does. He can't play anything straight. He is completely evil. And some of my favorite lines in the movie, Farina's threats to various people, especially Philip Baker Hall, are supposedly all improvised. I think my favorite one being
Don't say a word to me, Sidney. Don't say a fucking word to me. I'll get up and I'll bury this telephone in your head.
I love that one. I've never been angry enough to use that on somebody, but someday I will.
No, while that was great, I can't get over him just telling people,
Sidney, relax. Have a cream soda. Everything is going to be all over within a few minutes.
and that just makes me laugh because you'd think, have a drink. That would be a mobster reaction. His is like so wholesome. Have a cream soda.
I don't know if that's him like sort of insulting the person he's talking to. Like you're not man enough to have like a scotch or something like that. You're at this level. So
I don't know. That's a nice read of it, but I prefer to think of it as an aspect of the character that doesn't get fully explored. The idea that he really does want them to calm down, that he really does want them to relax. He is invested in them as human beings and has connections with them to the point where he wants to make sure they're okay.
That's a nice way of viewing it. That's a new dimension to Jimmy Serrano I don't think I would have seen.
Maybe.
But man, that scene in the limo where he's confronting Mardukas, this is the first time they've actually seen each other. In the middle of this goofy movie, it's a really chilling scene.
So I'm finally in the presence of greatness, huh? The Duke. The guy that steals money from the scum of the earth and gives it to the unfortunates of the world. I wanted to meet you face to face. Did you actually think that you were going to steal my money and get away with it? I stopped by here to tell you two things. Number one is that you're going to die tonight. Number two, I'm going to go home, have a nice hot meal. I'm going to find your wife, and I'm going to kill her too.
It is chilling, and the moment that bothers me the most, like in a wow, that's effective kind of way, like bothers me to my core kind of thing, the idea of I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to go have a really great dinner, and then I'm going to track down your wife. You're literally going to kill, and you're callous enough and so casual about this that you can go have a nice dinner and then go do it again. And that's chilling for me.
And like he has to rub it in that, I'm going to kill you and then I'm going to have, it's going to be comfortable for me. I'll have a nice meal. I'm going to be living great. Everything's going to go great for me and I'm going to inflict more pain.
Right.
And it goes to that confrontation with Jack where we've seen Mardukas needling Jack in all these different ways in sort of a positive way. And we see how Serrano needles Jack and it's just cruel, egging on this idea that, now this other corrupt cop is having sex with your wife and, you lost your job and,
right.
How's your kid, Anything he can do to dig at him and poke at him.
Well, Serrano is acting as the punishment side because I think in a lot of ways that the Duke is kind of representing the part of Jack that wants to heal a little bit. And, of course, Serrano is the side of Jack that wants to continue to punish himself. So we have these two characters basically acting as angel, in a way, and devil on Jack's shoulders.
Like Serrano, we have a really corrupt figure in the form of Eddie Moscone, played by the great Joe Pantoliano.
Oh, Joe.
It's weird. He looks so much taller in this movie than I remember him. Maybe it's just that he's next to De Niro, who's not exactly a tall guy either.
It's possible. I've never seen him with that much hair.
Yeah, even with that terrible comb over he has in the movie.
Yeah, I was like, I know who that is. I know that voice. Oh, he has hair on his head. Okay.
I feel bad to say it. He's so good at playing sleazy characters.
He is. I'm sure he himself is not, but, people are good at what they're good at.
Yeah.
And he has made an incredible career playing characters who are a bit slimy, who have ulterior motives, who are willing to double-cross.
To me, he'll always be the Fratelli brother there from the Goonies, though. That's the first thing I saw him in, and that kind of...
That was him?
That was him. The one who has the toupee that comes off midway through the movie.
I didn't know that.
That's the thing. You look at his career. I mean, he's been in everything. He's been all over the place.
The first time I really paid attention to him was, of course, The Matrix. Yeah, I had no idea that was actually him. I bet if I saw The Goonies again right this second, I'd be like, oh,
yep,
there he is.
And like La Bamba, he was Richie Valens' agent in that movie. The Fugitive, he's one of Tommy Lee Jones's group there. He has some of the best lines in that movie. Bound, he's great in that one. Plays a great villain in that movie. all over the place. From the moment he comes on screen and he's trying to lowball Jack on the bounty that he's there to collect, I mean, you know this guy is trouble.
What do you think? I'm going to try to stiff you?
You? Never. He would never try and stiff me.
Do I detect some kind of sarcasm here?
Never.
Where where have I inherited this reputation? I have never done business with anybody, and Jerry is my witness, that I have ever. Does that phone ever ring? Has that phone ever rang with a complaint about me? Never.
I also have to note Pontiliano's wardrobe in this movie. Those shirts he's wearing are just insane. And it might be the only thing that dates the movie are those incredibly bizarre 1980s shirts with these weird patterns that he wears.
Were those like the splatter pattern
Some of them,
shirts?
some of these weird, just random kind of check designs and just weird splotches
the
on them.
late 80s, cusp of early 90s, gross pastel shirts.
They're mostly like black, but they
Really?
just have these weird check patterns on them and stuff. It's just really bizarre. And sometimes he wears that weird sweater over them. Pontiliano brings some other great little touches to it. I love that when he pays Jack, he doesn't take money out of his wallet, he takes it out of his sock. Like he's constantly expecting that he's going to be robbed or someone's going to try and stick him up.
For the kind of job he has, it makes sense because people will know as a bail bondsman he has cash. So why not protect yourself as much as you can? Although, why would he take it out in public?
I don't know.
But, whatever.
But to me, that's also that mindset of he's always expecting someone's going to try and rob him or screw him over because he's going to try and rob and screw over anybody that he comes into contact with. Pontiliano was apparently offered one of the goon roles, but he didn't really like either of them because it was the kind of thing he was always playing. He wanted to play this character who was originally envisioned as older and larger, kind of an overweight character. And I think having him be this thin, squirrely, high-energy guy is really good.
I think he still plays a big character, but instead of being imposing physically, he really allows the character to fill space with voice and energy.
I also want to note one other character, Jerry Geisler, Eddie's equally corrupt office manager there, who keeps ratting out where they are to the mob. That actor, Jack Kehoe, unfortunately just passed away recently. He's a really quirky actor you might have seen in a bunch of other movies. He was in Serpico, where he was one of Al Pacino's corrupt fellow police officers. We actually just watched The Untouchables, where he's the bookkeeper. And because of him, I can never think about going to get some donuts quite the same way again.
I want to celebrate with some donuts. Who the fuck celebrates with donuts?
I might celebrate
I do
with
not
donuts.
like donuts, so I have a very hard time
like
relating
donuts,
to this.
A couple celebratory glazed donuts, right on. Yeah.
Gross.
Maybe the donut place was right next to his preferred phone booth, so that was part of it.
Well, but why? Oh, see, that's another thing. Jerry is not smart. He thinks he's smart. He's not smart. For one thing, he picks up the other line, and if you lived in a time like Tim and I did, where there were actual phone lines and phones that you could pick up and listen to somebody else's conversation, you had to be pretty damn slick to make sure that nobody heard the crackle or click or your breathing. I mean, there was a whole, like, you're a spy part of listening to somebody else's call in the 80s and the 90s. But
he manages to pull that part off pretty good.
He does. But then he goes out for donuts and he literally crosses the street and goes less than a block away to make a phone call.
And he couldn't look more suspicious in front of the phone booth. He kind of goes past it and then whips around and jumps into it.
Yeah.
And when the government guys are watching him, it's no wonder they're like, yeah, we should probably check on this guy.
Exactly. It's like he's not very bright. And that's something I love about the movie is nobody is a mastermind here, except I would argue for the Duke. The Duke is masterminding a lot of this. Everyone else is dumb in a lot of ways.
Dumb with some really good moments.
Well, of course. They're a lot more human than you see characters. Usually you see buffoons and evil geniuses or the detective who gets everything right. But we're working with a lot of characters who have good moments, bad moments, flaws, misconceptions. It's a good balance of real character.
Yeah, I love that, Dorfler even has the moment where he cancels Jack's credit card and uses it to find out where he was. And it occurred to me, he has it in this notebook and this idea that Dorfler has somehow gotten a hold of this number, and you wonder, what has he been doing with it all this time?
Right.
Or has he been sitting on it as this ace that he's going to play one of these days?
That's what it seemed like to me, too.
And then on the other hand, you have the goofy hitman like Tony Darvo, who has that moment with Dorfler where he sees on the picture, oh, here's the hotel where the Duke's at. We can just go pick him up.
Right.
That he has this little moment of, if not genius, at least being observant as well. Let's talk about the score, because this might be a slightly controversial thing.
So Anyone who knew me when I was a teenager, and I deeply apologize if you knew me as a teenager, I was an asshole. I loved Danny Elfman. I loved Oingo Boingo. Totally obsessed. If one person in the 90s was obsessed with one band that's kind of like, why? It was me and Oingo Boingo. So obviously that branched out into Danny Elfman's score work. I am not a fan of this score at all. I don't know which came first, the score or the song, when it came to conception. I know the song itself, Try to Believe, was supposed to be in the film, but wasn't. The biggest problem I have with this score is that it leans too heavily into the melody of the song. So that every time it comes up, I keep waiting for the vocals to start. And when they never do, I feel like I've been cut off at the knees a little bit. So the repetition of those, and it's a triumphant kind of melody. I mean, we've got trumpets and saxophones and the piano, and it's you're ready to get up and dance kind of tune. But nothing really ever comes of it. I will say that Elfman does lend the score a feeling of a noir film at points. He gets deep into bluesy guitar riffs, and that's nice. That's really nice. And he knew well enough when to pull away and not have the score at all. So he was allowing for the movie to open up without the sound. And it's not a criticism of the actual bit of music more than it is a criticism of feeling a little cock-blocked from listening to the song, if you know what I mean. Like, we don't even get it in the credits, and I watched the credits for it. So I don't know necessarily if you're going to disagree with my feelings on it, like where the feelings are coming from deep in my soul, but I know that you do like the score, so I'm interested to hear what about the score worked for you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I do disagree, but let me explain why. I kind of came from the opposite direction, where I knew Elfman more as a composer first and kind of got into the Oingo Boingo stuff later. And I remember at the time being really surprised to see his name on this, because at that point I was used to more of his Tim Burton-y style scores. So this was something new. The thing is, I saw this movie first and then found out about the song, so I wasn't constantly waiting for the lyrics. I just accepted it as the main theme of this movie. And I gotta say, that song, Try to Believe, is probably my all-time favorite song now. I remember first hearing it on the soundtrack and just absolutely loving it. I agree with some of the noir stuff you mentioned, but also little bits he brings in, like when they're in the desert, and it almost has more of a country twang to it on the guitar, things like that. The use of the accordion, which he uses in a couple other scores, which I really love.
I think more than anyone on the production, I think Elfman understood the tone and the changing tones of the film, because there is no one overlaying tone, and that can be really difficult to make a cohesive film. He does, through the score, do a good job of helping the movie tonally make sense. I mean, every character has their own theme, but that one bit of music that comes from Try to Believe shows up every time there's some kind of car chase, for instance. And that kind of, the audience has already been primed by that point. Like, oh yeah, this is the exciting bit. Or, we know when the bluesy guitar starts that, oh, this is a moment of seriousness and intrigue and detective work. So obviously I'm describing what composers for music do. But I do think that he does a good job of that.
It lets you know right off the bat that, we're going to have fun with this. You can relax, have fun with this movie, and whenever that main theme plays, it is fun. I love some of the leitmotifs he comes up with. He has a particularly fast-paced one for the FBI, and the way it keeps playing every time we cut back to Alonzo and his agents on Jack's trail almost makes it sort of a running joke, where we come back to it, it's like
the sunglasses.
Yeah, like, oh, they're still behind. Oh, they're still behind, and Alonzo's still frustrated. And it's that same piece of music has that repetition is comedy quality to it. I love Dorfler's sort of whimsical theme that he has that's a little goofy and a little off-kilter. And then when you come to Serrano, like the first time we see Serrano in the movie, he's introduced with this low, menacing tone that's a little different from the rest of the film. And we get that a little bit in the airport confrontation, too. It still fits in with the overall score, but it's letting you know that this is a little bit more serious. Jack has his own little theme for whenever he's kind of coming up with something clever to do. You can hear the first time he steals the FBI badge. And that slower, more melancholy one that we get in the coffee shop, and when he's actually having a heart-to-heart conversation with the Duke. Just these very kind of low-key leitmotifs to let you kind of get the mood of a particular scene. But yeah, to me, this is like walking music. If I'm out walking somewhere, I want to hear this music.
All of it, or just that one bit?
Most of it, honestly. Most of it actually kind of fits. I adore this score. This might be my favorite score of his. It's tough for me to judge because Elfman's had a lot of great stuff, but this is one of the ones that always jumps to mind.
That's funny, because when I started to branch out into his actual score work, I got, oh my gosh, we just talked about the title, Music from a Darkened Theater, I think?
Yep.
Yes. And this from Midnight Run, and there was a little bit of it from Dead Presidents, which may have been on the second one. I don't remember.
I love that Dead Presidents theme.
They're outliers for me in his early score work. And I had trouble accepting either of them because of that, because I knew him as one type of composer. So all of a sudden, you have Midnight Run, and then you have Dead Presidents, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? Now, 30 years later or so, 25, can I just say 20?
Sure. We'll pretend it's 20.
We'll pretend it's 20. I understand the scores in a different way. I'm not just looking for something off-kilter or kooky. And I appreciate, as an artist, the desire to stretch. So coming from that, I think I appreciate the score better than I would have 20 years ago. Despite my not really gelling with it, I think I would have outright hated it.
See, I loved it then, but I thought it was more of an outlier. And it's funny, when I look back over Elfman's kind of discography and realize, all right, you have Back to School, Hot to Trot. If you listen to those scores, they have a little bit of the same vibe.
They do.
So,
Hot to Trot definitely does, a little bit. I think Hot to Trot was a little lighter.
It was.
Because it was hot to trot.
But, I mean, it shows that this wasn't necessarily too far out of his wheelhouse. It was just sort of a different branch of what he was doing.
It's an outlier. I think this was definitely an outlier.
I think it was just that he was more recognized.
At the time.
Yeah, for the darker Tim Burton-y, Sam Raimi style stuff. A couple other cast members I do want to bring up before we move on. An interesting one is the guy who plays Carmine, the guy that Dorfler has chained to the radiator in the hotel room, played by Frank Pesch, who may not sound familiar.
He doesn't.
George Gallo would move on to write and direct a movie called 29th Street about this guy's life, where he was a guy cursed with good luck who eventually became a finalist for the New York State Lottery. It's an adorable movie with Anthony LaPaglia and Danny Aiello. It's great stuff. But after the whole lottery thing, he became kind of a semi-celebrity and started acting in movies. So he has this little cameo in this, and I just love that a few years later, Gallo would bring his life to the screen that way. The other notable one is Lois Smith, who you might remember as the grandmother from True Blood, Minority Report, Lady Bird, tons of stuff. Twister, yep. Who has a vocal cameo as Mrs. Nelson, the woman that De Niro manipulates to find out where the Duke is on the phone. We only really hear her voice. I think we might see her in a wide shot, but we never actually get a look at her, so it's interesting that they got this notable actress to do this tiny little role. And the other one is Philip Baker Hall as Sidney. It's really interesting to me to see him in this tiny little part. We saw Secret Honor where he plays Nixon not too long ago, and he's so amazing in that one. And of course, after this, he'd be in tons of Paul Thomas Anderson movies, Magnolia, Boogie Nights. For a while in the 90s, he was everywhere. He doesn't get a huge part. He's Serrano's very sensible lawyer who keeps advising him not to do criminal shit and, of course, instead is completely disregarded. But it's lovely to see him. Moving on to trivia, that actually brings up the point that Mosley isn't the only character to have an unofficial spin-off. When Paul Thomas Anderson made his first film, Hard Eight, he included Paul as a character named Sidney, who's based in Las Vegas. And I like to believe it's the same guy, that after the events of Midnight Run, Sidney went off and ended up having his own separate adventure in that film with John C. Reilly. Another great film. If you get the chance to rent it, it's terrific. The character of Jerry Geisler, he might be named after the famed Hollywood lawyer who defended Errol Flynn from his statutory rape charge and Busby Berkeley for his vehicular homicide charge and investigated the death of George Reeves. So a weird little bit of Hollywood trivia, it would seem like.
Also interesting that if that's the case, he would choose to name that particular character after him.
Yeah, you'd think you'd want to name somebody more on the side of law.
Right.
The cab driver who tells Walsh off in the last scene is played by Bob Maroff. Maroff had previously acted with De Niro as a mafioso who De Niro shoots in Taxi Driver.
Nice. The Taxi Driver killed in Taxi Driver.
The word fuck and its derivatives are used 119 times in this film. Not the record. I think Wolf of Wall Street might have the record. I'm not sure. Apparently, De Niro and Ashton developed their own system to judge how often they should use it in a particular scene to make sure they weren't going too far overboard. And also, in that scene where Dorfler tries to take the Duke away on the train and De Niro starts beating him up, there were a couple points apparently where De Niro really hit him and nearly knocked him out.
Oh.
Thankfully, not the take they use in the film. As for the legacy of the movie, there were 3 TV sequels called Another Midnight Run, Midnight Runaround, and Midnight Run for Your Life that featured Christopher McDonald from Quiz Show playing Jack, Dan Hedaya as Eddie Moscone, Ed O'Ross as Marvin, and John Fleck as Jerry Geisler. I've seen some of them. They're not great. They're fine, but you can't replace this cast. It just doesn't work without these actors in it. And back in 2012, there was talk of a sequel. De Niro and his production company were developing a follow-up that would have had the Duke recruiting Walsh to try and find his son who had gotten himself in trouble. Nothing's really come of it since. I'm wondering if the fact that Dennis Farina passed away kind of put an end to that. If maybe it was going to be about Serrano coming back into their lives, that would make more sense.
Maybe.
And after he died, there was no point. I'm almost happy it didn't happen just because I don't know if a sequel would really work. I don't know if you want to take that chance.
I prefer not to. There are some sequels that I've been skeptical about to the point of just like raging against it that I've been proven wrong. So I don't want to say for certain it would be awful, but some films, one and done is enough.
Yeah.
For me.
Okay. What is your favorite scene?
My favorite scene is kind of a little poignant and a little sad, but also funny, and I connect with it because food. The scene in the diner when Jack and the Duke are starving and they barely have any money. They have enough money for a cup of coffee.
What can I do for you boys?
Coffee, please.
How much is the coffee?
It's 53 cents.
How much is tea?
53 cents.
Love tea.
Okay, and our breakfast special today is chorizo and eggs.
Chorizo and eggs?
Chorizo and eggs. Yes.
What is that, please?
It's a Mexican sausage mixed in with scrambled eggs, and it comes with hash browns and toast.
I won't be having that, thank you.
All he wants is the eggs and chorizo. And you can see him looking at the cook who's working at the grill cooking. You can see just like how hungry he is. And knowing that he has the money to buy himself eggs and chorizo, but he's denying it because hiding the fact that he has that money saves him. It's another stall tactic. Because if he has that money, they can get on a bus, they can go where they need to go. You know, so this is in his interest, but also deeply against his interests. And I love that character moment that you can see how much he wants this one thing, and he's denying it. While at the same time, he's been promised by Jack that if he holds out, they'll get the money, he can have anything he wants. And like a child, he's like, chorizo and eggs, even chorizo and eggs, and your heart breaks a little bit for him because despite how intelligent and manipulative he is, there is a childlike aspect to him that's endearing.
I'll admit I have real trouble picking a favorite scene from this movie. There are so many moments that are just so great, but one that's been sticking with me a lot as I've been thinking about this movie is that last scene in the airport where Jack lets the Duke go. The moment after he gives him the money and Jack is turning to leave the airport and stops and turns around like he's going to say one last thing to the Duke, and the Duke is already gone. And you realize that the Duke is going to go on the run again. He and his wife are still wanted, so they're probably going to hide. And this idea that after this adventure, the odds on Jack ever seeing the Duke again are pretty slim. That this weird little sort of friendship they sort of developed, that's it. That's all there's ever going to be, probably. Although, speaking of a sequel, I always like to imagine in my head Jack opening his little coffee shop that I imagine he'd call like the Midnight Run coffee shop. Haha.
Cute.
And that one day Mardukas would show up with his wife, order his chorizo and eggs, and maybe he and Jack would retire to one of the little corner booths and catch up on how things have been and where they are and just have this nice little reunion. But that scene in the airport, I love that little moment. I love Elfman's sad little score that goes with it. It's wonderful. Okay, recommendations. What do you think somebody would like if they enjoy this movie?
So I have 2 recommendations, even though I could go on and on because Even though I didn't love this movie to bits, this is one of my favorite genres. I love a chase film. I love a farce. I love a wide variety of characters who have different agendas and end up kind of smashing into each other for the very end. So my first recommendation is a movie that I'd read the book way before the movie came out, and I was excited for the movie, but then 9/11 happened. And it got pushed off, and it got pushed off, and it got buried during its release because it had the unfortunate combination of a plane and a bomb. And it was Dave Barry's Big Trouble.
Oh, I remember that movie.
Just to start with, if you love these kinds of farce films of characters who have to chase each other to stop something or get something, or this is the kind of film that you want, especially because one of the characters is a toad who has decided that the dog's food is his food and who just sits on the dog's food. And the dog is also a character, and the dog just wants the food and wants the frog to move, but the frog is hallucinogenic. And he can't get the food without licking the frog and getting high. I mean, this is incredible. Like, you can't believe the stuff that happens in this book/movie. It stars Tim Allen, which I personally find unfortunate, but he does a great job here. Stanley Tucci, Rene Russo. So definitely that one. And also, hilariously, also starring Rene Russo, Get Shorty.
Oh, I was thinking that's a really great choice.
Yeah, it's Travolta, Dennis Farina again, and it's an Elmore Leonard story, which is what this reminds me of. Midnight Run has the kind of story that is an Elmore Leonard thing. And there's the mob. There's a bunch of characters kind of running around. It has a lot of the same flavor. So while I recommend those two specifically, I would also recommend almost anything Rene Russo's been in, because she hasn't been in that many films and she needs a lot more appreciation. So go see her movies.
Oh, she is awesome. And another thing about Get Shorty, you actually get to see Dennis Farina beat somebody up with a phone. He doesn't quite bury it in the head, but he gets there.
It's the punchline.
I was trying to think of good movies about bounty hunters that do not involve Jango Fett or Boba Fett. There's not too many really great ones. One that sprung to mind that it kind of got a mixed reception, but I really enjoy, is Steve McQueen's last film, The Hunter, which is this look at the day-to-day life of this down-and-out bounty hunter trying to catch these criminals. It has some amazing action and stunt scenes. There's one chase scene on top of an L train that's absolutely incredible. But what's really fun is you get to see McQueen kind of spoof his screen image a bit. He plays this guy who... he's rough and tumble, but also he's a lousy driver. And it's a recurring joke from the movie that he can't drive without, like, crashing his car into things.
So you actually reminded me of a movie that I haven't thought about in years, actually. I wouldn't know at this point if I'd consider it a good movie, because I haven't seen it since I was, like, a kid. But Pink Cadillac, starring Clint Eastwood and, oh my gosh, the theater... singer-actress. What's
Bernadette
her name?
Peters?
Bernadette Peters, yes. And he's a bounty hunter.
I forgot he was a bounty hunter.
And it's another kind of farcical thing.
Okay, there's another one.
Yeah.
Then. Oh, one other fun connection with the hunter in this one, though. Tracy Walter, who everybody would know as Bob the Goon from Batman, shows up as the diner counterman in this movie, plays the psycho villain in The Hunter. So, again, another random connection. And speaking of random connections, my other recommendation would be, I think actually it is an Elmore Leonard one, Out of Sight, with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. Again, has that great sense of all these different characters in a chase converging on things. And that tone of, oh, this is really funny. Oh my God, that was really violent and scary and something terrible just happened. And again, you have Dennis Farina, in this case, playing an ex-cop and a good guy for once, not playing the bad guy. But that film, again, had that same pure fun tone that this one did.
So what we've learned from our recommendations is anything Rene Russo, anything Elmore Leonard, anything Dennis Farina.
Yeah.
It seems like it, right?
We needed more movies with Rene Russo and Dennis Farina together, based on an Elmore Leonard book. We needed a whole subgenre of those, I think. Okay, that ends the discussion, but not the conversation. If you'd like to have your say about Midnight Run or feel that we missed something, check out the comments section for this episode on www.cinemaspection.com and start talking. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at CinemaSpection. For our personal accounts, I'm at Timosaurus.
I'm at The Lady Latte.
Our show is available on both Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe, and if you have a moment, please leave us a review there. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on the screen. Anything else to say about Midnight Run?
No.
All right, then we're going to go get some donuts.
No, we're not.